Thanks, Gene. I was a professional clown with Ringling Brothers. I mention it because it has informed my scholarship. Clowning was a long time ago, scholarship more recently. And there are plenty of people who know a lot more about clowns than I do.
Oh.
I was like a grunt. I know what it was like on the ground. But theories of humor, of comedy, I'll leave that to other people. Let me see. I'm starting my timer. Oh, yes. Okay. The conference theme, why send Huck to a circus? Why bind Jim? The conference theme of irreverence, rebellion, and resilience matches, with a bit of stretching, three aspects of the circus episode in Chapter 22 of Huckleberry Finn, expanding on an earlier article I wrote in the South Atlantic Review. I suggest we veer from the usual interpretation of that deceptively simple episode. Huck's description of an antebellum circus has often been treated as history, virtually primary evidence. However, Mark Twain was irreverent in temporarily turning Huck from the quick-witted adolescent into a guileless child at the performance, fitting Gilded Age cliches of circus and children. Then he got rebellious by swirling hints of the earlier antebellum circus that he had known. And here we're getting to the political part. I propose the resilience was Twain's, giving Jim greater dignity through the course of the book, ironically reaching a peak when he had Jim bound, which was a peak of indignity. Okay, first, some revised history. Circus counts accurately depict the first American circus, 1793, John Bell Ricketts. However, almost every circus history over the past century and more has treated it as the beginning of this grand family fun. Family fun was a later idea. They all missed that the equestrian business first stumbled for 3 decades against thousands of other amusements. It wasn't clear what it was. It wasn't even called circus. That word was reserved for the circular arenas. So the business wasn't called circus, but you don't get that in any circus history. Then innovations in the 1820s fostered its rise. The business, finally called circus, flourished mid-century as an American institution, offering sex, violence, politics, in mutual development with democracy, which was another new idea in the 1790s. Old words, but they were new ideas. Then, America's most democratically shared experience, circus was profound fare for savvy adults, attracting the largest American audiences, thousands at a time, in country tents. That's Dan Rice's tent in 1852 or so, and urban theaters. That's Walnut Street Theater, oldest operating theater in the country, where I acted a couple times, and where Dan Rice performed. It began as a circus venue. Not only the largest audiences, circus audiences, were the most diverse. Men and women, black and white, elites and laborers, when most amusements were splitting people out. It was also widely respected. Newspaper scribblers and elite authors, Emerson, Douglas, Dickinson, Melville, Abbott, used circus as a metaphor because it was the lingua franca of American life. Everybody knew circus. Most everybody went, but everybody knew it. Twain, writing in 1885 then, set his circus in that robust antebellum past. So he's doing two things. He's using Gilded Age cliches, which we recognize, but woven through it and adjacent episodes were other elements. So, what had been serious pleasure for serious adults before the Civil War was flipped in the Gilded Age to children's fun, perfect for boys, girls, and other unsophisticated folks, including rubes, and in the era's racism, presumably childish black people. Grown-ups now decided they liked circus not for its serious content, not because it was a mature pleasure, which had been the antebellum case, but because they were young at heart. which was another new 19th century idea. Stories followed suit. Adult interest yielded to Gilded Age tales of boys running away with the circus. Notice that the tales mostly erased girls, appearing only as potential mates or objects of lust. See Henry James' first novel. Ironically, the glorification of Gilded Age circus diminished it. No longer was it seen as serious matter for serious people. The diminishment shrunk earlier circus even more, redefining the antebellum versions as small town, small time stuff for small fries. However, I'm writing a book right now challenging that enduring Gilded Age notion of antebellum circus as sweet but negligible. Building on 50 years of circus studies when it started being taken seriously by scholars, and 30 years of my own work, I point out that circus developed with democracy, each influencing the other. Now, Twain employed the new circus idea of the Gilded Age, as I said, as readers would have expected, yet he also layered in elements of that earlier circus. Huck at the circus could be simply another incident of life on the Mississippi before the Civil War. By the 1840s, many troops plied their trade up and down the river. However, when Twain wrote in the 1880s, stories then featured boys sneaking into the circus, awed by circus, running away with the circus. It was almost inevitable then that Twain would put a circus in a boy book. To fit the literary pattern of circus in the Gilded Age he had named, Twain turned Huck temporarily childish. That's point number one, irreverence. As Twain knew, he was undermining his depiction of Huck as a capable adolescent, navigating the adult world well. Though traditionally pictured as a young boy, Huck is 13 or 14, an age in that era when boys, young men, were on their own, out in the world, working. They weren't little kids. Yet Twain pictured him at the circus as a little kid, as a guileless child, awed by, quote, the splendidest sight there ever was. Huck gushed that every woman was perfectly beautiful and looking just like a gang of real sure enough queens. And the men were all ever so tall and airy and straight. And the clown, quote, he most killed the people. The ringmaster couldn't ever say a word to him, but he was back at him quick as a wink with the funniest things a body ever said. And how he could ever think of that, so many of them, and so sudden and so pat was what I couldn't no way understand. Now, if you read about this in the literature, scholars usually say, yeah, Twain was just showing how silly Huck was and how bad clowns were. That's the traditional idea. That's what's out there. So what Huck sees as sparkling wit was in fact tired old jokes. And to be fair, that was a fairly standard complaint about some clowns. However, if I can turn this page, I guess we're going to have to skip that. Oh, there we go. I should print them one at a time instead of back to back. I just saving money on paper. But not Dan Rice, a clown Twain likely saw in Hannibal Moe and likely the model for Huck's clown. Though sometimes confused with T.D. Rice, Dan Rice was the century's most famous circus performer, nationally renowned for his spontaneous wit, and called the great American humorist before Twain adopted the label. Scholars do routinely find a scathing review in a Hannibal newspaper. It's really quite delicious in how scathing it is. But that ignored, and so Twain scholars, seeing that, say, oh look, here's a clown, Dan Rice came to town, he was this bad. But that review was part of the era's culture wars of clowns, culture wars of audiences. It wasn't too much longer before the Astor Place riot erupted because of those culture wars. How much say could an audience have? How much could you engage an audience? Dan Rice was a master at engaging the audience, and this Hannibal editor didn't like it. The other Hannibal editor, another Hannibal paper, did like it. St. Louis liked it. The rest of the country liked it. So this was a rare pan. So rather than thinking of Huck's clown spouting old jokes, picture Robin Williams at his best. That's not a random comparison. Briefly, Robin Williams was interested in playing Dan Rice based on my book, Dan Rice, the Most Famous Man You Never Heard Of. Now, it's briefly, and movie stars have a gazillion projects possible, so it's not like it was close to happening. But he was interested. He knew the book. So, point 2. Twain's irreverence slid into rebellion with the circus itself. Despite the apparently sweet depiction, he surrounded it... Let me see. Oh, there's Dan. Okay, well, I'll stick with Dan for a minute. So, he surrounded the circus episode with the violence typical of antebellum circus. You had to be an efficient fighting unit as a circus because you came to town a stranger and the local toughs were looking for new people to beat on. In Ohio, there was a 3-day circus war where the circus couldn't get out of town because the violence was, because they were being attacked. It took 3 days to get out of town. So, Twain, knowing about that past, knowing about circus violence, preceded the circus episode with violence like that found at the circus. In Colonel Sherburne's murder of a drunk and a mob intent on lynching him. That's immediately before the circus. Huck's circus itself suggests violence as the fake drunk nearly causes a riot. In addition, sexuality was also key to the appeal of circus, which offered the clearest view in public life of the human body, lightly and tightly clothed, male and female. That is, people went for the skin show. Not literally skin, because they were wearing tights, but for legs. The most common circus image of the century was likely this one. Not this particular one, but this is an example. W.H. Brown, 1850, 86. Woman standing on horseback in arabesque, one leg raised behind her, with the man pictured looking up her skirt. That image recurs time after time in advertising, in handbills, in children's books, in trade cards. Meanwhile, in usage that survived into the 20th century, sex play in brothels was called playing circus. You can find it in East of Eden. There's a passage where they go to the brothel, and it says they're going to play circus. So, though Twain famously avoided direct reference to sex, he hinted at it in describing every equestrian's, quote, dress flapping soft and silky around her hips. He added that the flapping around their hips made a female rider look like the most loveliest parasol. And what does a parasol do? It raises like that. I argue he was hinting at sex. Considering the state of circus at the time and that he knew it, it seems to me, pretty clear. I hope it seems that to you. Now, adjacent episodes added more circus elements, particularly related to Dan Rice. When the fake king and queen present the royal nonsuch, and then they presented another night, and then they skipped town, that echoed an instance that Dan Rice, in his publicity pamphlet, published the same year he played Hannibal for the first time. Rice did exactly that. Presented one audience, then another audience, and then skipped. This discussion of their jobs, of the Duke and King's jobs, matched Rice's jobs as related in that pamphlet, except for one, typesetter, which was Twain's job. And then there's Hamlet's soliloquy in Huckleberry Finn, which patched together lines from various Shakespeare plays. When I was an actor, I used it as a comic monologue for auditions. Let me see. Oh, this is another instance of that circus image. Women and men were on display. Walt Whitman wrote about it does boys no harm to see an acrobat's limbs in all their glory. So, to be here, this is the Hamlet soliloquy. To be or be, that is the bare bodkin that makes calamity of so long life. For who would these fardels bear till Burnham would to come to Dunsnake, and so on. So, it is nonsense, and it parodies the era's Shakespearean clowns. However, Twain likely saw Dan Rice deliver clever versions of Hamlet and Othello. The scholars sometimes belittled them, mocked the rhythm. They were clear summaries in rhymed couplets of regular iambic pentameter. Hamlet the Dane, of him just deign to hear, and for that abject lend at least one ear. I will tell unfold, whose life's word will freeze your soul and turn your blood to curd. Whose ghost was he so dismal and unhappy? It was my eyes, the ghost of Hamlet's pappy. Now, it's a comic monologue, but the thing about it is, and again, I've seen, parenthetically, scholars looking at Circus, of any field, because Circus comes up in everything. I mean, I've given talks about Dickinson, about Alcott, and they've been ignored because scholars come to it and go, Circus, we know what Circus is. It's this negligible stuff for little kids. So they see it and move on, rather than seeing how are the writers using it at the time. Ask me afterwards about Emily Dickinson and Susan Dickinson and their Circus connection. And if you know Dickinson, you know what's going on there. So we've got serious stuff, and this particular one was originally printed in England. So Rice picked it up from a legitimate source. So Twain likely saw them, as the scathing review complained about Rice's obscene Hamlet. This is what he was talking about. Now, beyond the use of actual circus elements, Twain did two curious things with that Circus episode. First, he used it to interrupt his thematic dichotomy. Throughout the book, activities on shore, human activities, are generally kind of shabby, are second-rate, are just poor excuses for human being to be doing, things for human being to be doing. While on the river, nature was glorious, right? In the Circus episode, he uses the same kind of glowing description that he uses elsewhere for the river, for life on the raft. So he's interrupting his thematic dichotomy. Second, bear with me on this one, he places the Circus episode in the exact middle of the book. Now, to say that, you could say that about any book, because there's something in the middle of any book. However, it's placed in the middle and tracks his process of writing the book. We know he was trying to write another boy book to make money. After Tom Sawyer worked, he's doing it again. So he picked it up and he wrote some, put it down. He picked it up again, put it down. Then he returned to Hannibal. That visit reminded him that his hometown, the wellspring of his creative imagination, the spark that created Tom Sawyer, had always been a scruffy little river town. Going back to Hannibal, he realized it. So he restarted the book with a new goal, writing a satire of shabby antebellum life. We see the shift in his drastic flip of Sherburne as a heartless killer who will sure burn in hell for murdering a man. Oh, I forgot this one. Bell Britain, 1856. This is Dan Rice. Backing up a bit. What do you guess was the amusement of town last evening? The circus, Dan Rice's Circus. Now this is by a society writer in fashionable Newport. There were as many as 5,000 people there, all mixed up with the most democratic indiscrimination. Fifth Avenue belles sitting on narrow boards with their dresses under their arms alongside of Irish chambermaids and colored persons of all sizes and sexes. Again, it was a democratic crowd. So, back to Hannibal. So he visited Hannibal and realized that it was a shabby little river town. So, wait. Oh, I went too far. Oh, there we go. So Sherburne, this is murder. It's murder in the book. But then he gets back to the book at that episode, and suddenly Sherburne becomes a hero facing down the mob. Twain is now talking about the mob, the people, those shabby people who will almost lynch people. You've got a parallel with the mob that almost lynches Sherburne until he stands up to him, and the mob that almost lynches or grabs the apparently drunk writer in the circus episode until the ringmaster, another authority figure, another white man, says, "Cool it, let's give him a try." And then we find out he's part of the act. A writerly quirk suggests this shift. This is my reading of it. I'll be curious what you think. Chapters before the circus, after the first paragraph and chapter 22, the circus chapter rather, they start with short paragraphs, usually with a number or a time in them. Chapter 3, in the morning. Chapter 4, 3 or 4 months. Chapter 5, in a minute. Chapter 6, $2 or $3. Individually immaterial, together they suggest a writer struggling to find a groove, which we know he was doing because he kept putting the book down and picking it up, like trouble starting a car on a cold morning. Though numbers appear at the start of chapters. After the circus, Twain's writing now flowed. He had found his subject. Now, black people had attended circus regularly since the start. That was this. So, they were constant part of the circus, and black writers wrote about circus. Frederick Douglass wrote about how much American institutions ignored black people, barred black people, or submitted them on sufferance that no white person would allow, but the circus accepted them. So black people wrote about it, black people saw it. However, by the Gilded Age, the new child-focused narrative, remember circus is now for children, added them as black people as innately childish, like little boys and girls. That was nothing new, typical racism, but after the struggle of the Civil War and the hope of Reconstruction, and then its betrayal, white people rationalized the resubjugation of black people by escalating impressions of them as foolish, incapable of governing themselves, much less the country. So, if a circus appeared early in the book, when we meet Jim, as a standard issue minstrelsy buffoon, we're almost time, okay. Twain would have used standard issue mockery, Jim bumbling into the ring, stuttering in minstrel dialect. But, including the racist cliche readers expected, would have violated the progress Twain had made himself. Point 3, his resilience. By the circus episode, Huck increasingly recognized Twain's humanity, so did Twain. So, to wrap up quickly, he was tied at the circus because of all the various dodges to explain why a white boy was traveling with an enslaved black person. This was the only one that incapacitated him. The others, painting in black, lies, the handbill. This time, it incapacitated him so the reader would know, okay, circus, black people, we're going to see the black person show up and do something stupid. But Twain, very subtly, but certainly said, don't worry about that. He's busy right now. He's tied up. So let's get on with the rest of it. In Huckleberry Finn, Mark Twain exercised one of his great strengths as a writer, employing his era's cultural assumptions. At the same time, he irreverently turned Huck temporarily childish. He rebelliously mixed Gilded Age cliches with earlier mature circus. Finally, he resiliently undercut the era's racism. Percival Everett's James points out what a shabby portrait of Jim was at first. I suggest Twain grew, and when when Everett names him James, he gives him his full humanity. I suggest Twain started that process. Thank you.